And we're back with the 12th chapter of Oversea Under Stone by Susan Cooper. Barney has been through a really scary ordeal. He wandered into the carnival crowd, got grabbed by who turned out to be Miss Withers in a cat suit, thrown to her brother in a sheik's costume, wrapped up in a sheet, and driven to Bill's house. At first he was like, oh, maybe it is a joke, kind of hoping against hope. I mean, this would be shocking to have happen again. Watch The Wicker Man if you want to see what a carnival like this looks like. It's very eerie and weird. But nope, it's Bill's house, and he knows things are going to be bad. Bill's face lit up out of its downturned sullenness as he saw Barney, and he grinned across at Miss Withers. You got him then, he said. Miss Withers cut in quickly, stepping forward, almost pushing the boy out of the way. Hello, Bill, she said smoothly. We've brought a young friend of ours on a visit. I don't think anyone will mind. We could all do with something to eat. Run and see if you can manage to rustle anything up, will you? Mind, said the boy. I should say not. He looked at Barney again with the same eager, unpleasant grin, and then turned and disappeared down the long corridor, calling something into an open doorway as he passed. Come along in, Barney, the girl said. She propelled him gently through the door and shut it behind her. Barney looked around him in the long, empty passage, at the marks of damp on the fading wallpaper, and he felt very small and lonely. He heard a deep voice call from somewhere inside the house. Withers, is that you? Miss Withers, who had been standing surveying Barney with a slight smile, jumped and put her hand half-consciously up on his collar. Come, she said curtly. Mr. Withers, who had did this. Come, he said curtly. He took Barney by the hand and led him down the corridor, their footsteps echoing on the uncarpeted floor, to the doorway of a room at the far end. It was a big room, dark after the blazing sunlight outside. Long windows stretched from floor to ceiling, in one wall with long, shabby velvet curtains pulled across, and the light that shafted in between them fell on a big square desk in the center of the room, its top littered with papers and books. The room seemed empty. Then Barney jumped as he saw a tall man move in the shadow beyond the sunlight. Ah, said the deep voice. I see you have brought the youngest of them, the white-haired child. I am most interested to make his acquaintance. How do you do, Barnabas? He held out his hand, and Barney, bemused, took it. The voice was not unpleasant and rather kind. How do you do? He said faintly. He looked up at the tall man, but in the half-light he had only a vague impression of deep-shadowed eyes under dark, heavy brows and a clean-shaven face. The smooth edge of a silk jacket brushed his hand. I was about to have a cool drink, Barnabas, the man said, as courteously as if he were talking to someone older than himself. Will you join me? He waved his hand toward the shadows, and Barney saw the glint of silver and white cloth on a low table beside the desk. The boy has had nothing to eat, sir, Miss Withers said, behind Barney, in a peculiarly hushed, reverent voice. We thought perhaps Bill could fetch something. Her voice died away. The man looked at her and grunted. Very well, Polly, for goodness sake. Go and change into some normal clothes. You look ridiculous. The necessity for fancy dress is over, and you are not at the carnival now. He spoke sharply, and Barney was astonished at the meekness with which Miss Withers answered him. Yes, sir, of course. She slipped away into the passage, sleek and inhuman, in the black cat skin. Come in, my boy, sit down. He spoke softly again, and Barney came slowly forward into the room and sat down in an armchair. It creaked with the crackling rustle of wickerwork, and he suddenly felt for an instant that he had been in the room before. He glanced round, his eyes growing accustomed to the dim light, at the dark walls and the shelves of books rising to the ceiling. There was something, but he could not place it. Perhaps it was just that the room reminded him a little of the Grey House. As if he read his thoughts, the man said, I hear you are on holiday in the Grey House above the harbour. Barney said, surprised at his own daring. It must be a very interesting house. That seems to be the only thing anyone ever says to us. The man leant forward, resting his hand on the edge of the desk. Oh? The deep voice rose a little with eagerness. Who else has asked you about it? "Oh, no one important," Barney said hastily. "After all, it's a nice house. Do you live here, Mr.—" "My name is Hastings," the big man said, and at the sound of the name, Barney again felt a flicker of familiarity, vanishing as soon as it came. "Yes, I do. This is my house. Do you like it, Barnabas?" "It's rather like the grey house, as a matter of fact," Barney said. The man turned back toward him again. "Indeed. Now what makes you say that?" "Well," Barney began, but then the door opened, and the boy Bill came in carrying an enormous tray with a big jug of milk and some bottles of lager, glasses, and a plate piled with sandwiches. He crossed the room to where the tall man stood and put the tray down on the desk, nervously, just within reach, as if he were frightened to come too near. "Miss Withers said, for something to eat, sir," he said gruffly, already backing toward the door. The man waved him away without speaking. The sight of the sandwiches made Barney realize how long it had been since breakfast, and he felt more cheerful. He sat back in the creaking chair and glanced round him. It could have been worse, he thought. The mysterious Mr. Hastings seemed to mean him no harm, and he was beginning to enjoy the sight of all their enemies cringing in terror before someone else. He took a sandwich from the plate, held out to him, and bit into it cheerfully. The bread was soft and new, with plenty of butter, and in the middle there was some delicious kind of potted meat. He began to feel better still. Mr. Withers moved silently across the desk and poured him out a glass of milk. Then he began opening the bottles of lager. The big man called Hastings sat down in the chair behind the desk and swung gently from side to side, regarding Barney thoughtfully from beneath his heavy brows. He said softly, conversationally, "Is it buried under the grey house, Barnabas, or one of the standing stones?" Halfway through a gulp of milk, Barney suddenly choked. He groped for the desk and put the glass down with a bang and leaned forward, coughing and spluttering. Mr. Withers, soft-footed, crossed to pat him on the back. "Dear me, Barnabas," he murmured, "has something gone down the wrong way?" Barney, his mind working furiously, went on coughing for rather longer than he needed to. When he looked back, he took refuge instinctively in innocence. "I'm sorry, I caught my breath," he said. "Did you say something?" "I think you heard perfectly well what I said," Mr. Hastings said. He turned up again, towering very tall over Barney in the low chair, and walked over to the window with a glass of lager in his hand. The light fell on his face for the first time, and watching, Barney felt a slight chill of uneasiness at the flat, permanent scowl of the brows and the grim lines running to the mouth. It was a strong, far-away face, something like his great-uncle's, but with a frightening coldness behind it that was not like Great-Uncle Mary at all. Barney found himself wishing very much that there was somebody to tell Great-Uncle Mary where he had gone. Mr. Hastings held up his glass to the window. The sunlight shone through it clear and golden. "An ordinary glass of beer," he said abstractedly, "until you hold it against the light, and then it becomes quite transparent. You can see right through it." He swung round on Barney, so that he was silhouetted, dark and menacing, against the window again. "As transparent as every single thing you children have been doing these past days. Do you think we have not seen through it all? Do you think we have not been watching?" "I don't know what you mean," said Barney. "You may be a stupid little boy," Mr. Hastings said, "but not, I think, as stupid as all that. Come along. We know that you have found a map, and that with the help of your esteemed great-uncle, Professor Lyon," his mouth twisted at the words as if he were tasting something unpleasant, "you have been attempting to trace the place to which it leads. We know that you have come very near to the end of that track, and since, my dear Barnabas, we cannot afford to risk your reaching the end of it, we have decided at last to draw in the net and put a stop to your little quest. That is what you are doing here." Barney shriveled at the menace in the cold, deep voice. His mouth felt very dry. He reached forward and picked up the glass of milk again and took a long drink. "I'm sorry," he said, wide-eyed at Mr. Hastings over the rim of the glass and licking a mustache of milk away from his upper lip. "I don't know what you mean. Could I have another sandwich, please?" Behind him he heard Mr. Withers' sharp, shocked intake of breath, and for a second a very small voice, deep inside his brain, crowed with triumph. But he watched the tall figures by the window apprehensively. The tall figure by the window apprehensively. It seemed to grow for a moment and loom still more menacingly over him, and then it moved abruptly back into the dim shadow of the rest of the room. "Give him another sandwich," Mr. Hastings said, "and then you can go, Withers. You know what you have to do. We haven't much time. Come back when I ring." Mr. Withers, his dark, stained face scarcely visible in the gloom, pushed the plate of sandwiches across to Barney's elbow. He said obsequiously, "Yes, sir," and ducking his head in a bow, he went out of the room. Barney took another sandwich, feeling fatalistically that whatever was likely to happen, he might as well eat. "Why do they call you sir?" he said curiously. A tall man came and sat down at the desk, playing with a pencil between his fingers. "Who is there that you would call sir?" "Well, nobody really, only the masters at school." "Perhaps I am one of their masters," Mr. Hastings said. "But they aren't in school." "I think you would not really understand, Barnabas. In fact, there are a great many things that you do not understand. I wonder what stories that great-uncle of yours has put into your head. Has he told you that we are bad and wicked, no doubt, and that he is a good man?" Barney blinked at him and took another bite of his sandwich. Mr. Hastings smiled grimly. "Ah, but of course you do not know what I am talking about. You haven't the slightest idea." The heavy irony in his deep voice made Barney wrinkle his nose. "Well, let us forget that just for a moment and pretend that you do know what I mean. You have been led to believe, I think, that my friends and I are everything that is evil, that we want to follow up the clues in the map because we can do bad things with what we find. You have nothing to go on but your great-uncle's word, and perhaps one or two strange things that Polly or Norman Withers may seem to have done." The voice dropped until it was silky and very gentle. "But just think, Barnabas, of the strange things your great-uncle does, coming out of nowhere and vanishing again. He has vanished again today, has he not? Well, no, of course you can't answer me, because we are only pretending that you know what I am talking about, but this is not the first time he has unexpectedly disappeared, and I think it will not be the last." He stared at Barney, dark eyes penetrating and level from beneath the overhanging brow. Barney ate his sandwich a little more slowly, unable to take his own gaze away. "As for our being evil, well now, Barnabas, do I strike you as being a bad man? Have I done you any harm? There you sit, eating and drinking quite happily, certainly not looking alarmed. Are you frightened of me?" "You had me kidnapped," Barney said flatly. "Oh, come now. That was just a little joke of Polly's. I wanted to talk to you, that's all." Mr. Hastings sat back in his chair, spread his arms wide, with the tips of his fingers just touching the edge of the desk. Look, my boy, I will make a bargain with you. I will tell you what is actually behind everything that has been going on these last days, and you will stop playing this game of not having seen the map." He did not wait for Barney to say anything. "We are indeed hunting the same thing that your great-uncle is hunting, my friends and I, but whatever story he has spun you about us, quite frankly, about a lot of moonshine. Your great-uncle is a scholar and an outstanding man. Nobody would dispute that, and I probably know it better than you. The trouble is that he himself knows it, and thinks about it much too much." "What do you mean?" said Barney indignantly. "When a man is famous for being a very great scholar, he wants very much to go on being famous. You found this old manuscript, you and your brother and sister, and when you told your great-uncle about it, he realized, as you did not, how important it was. When he saw it, he was even more certain. Now, I, Barnabas, am the curator. That means the director of one of the most important museums in the world. I have been hunting the manuscript that you found, and especially what it leads to, for a very long time. They are both very important to the people who study such things, and could make a lot of difference to the total knowledge there is in the world. And your great-uncle knew that I was hunting them, and there we will pause.